Good evening, everybody. My name is Duncan, and I have the privilege of just sharing with you a few thoughts tonight in Night Blessing. Last night, we began a brief exploration of the Beatitudes in the Sermon on the Mount, and we looked at Matthew chapter 5, verse 1, that invited us to climb with Jesus, to sit and to listen to his voice. Tonight, I want to return to that very same passage and ask you whether or not we are able to gather to be in such a quiet place that we can listen to him. Let's read again Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak, and he taught them. Last night I read you the Message version of those words as well. I'm going to do it again tonight. When Jesus saw his ministry drawing huge crowds, he climbed a hillside. Those who were apprenticed to him, the committed, climbed with him. Arriving at a quiet place, he sat down and taught his climbing companions. And this is what he said. It's that little phrase in Eugene Peterson's paraphrase, arriving at a quiet place. He sat down, that I want to reflect on this evening with you. Our lives at the moment can be full of so many different voices, can't they? There can be the voices of fear and anxiety and uncertainty as we look around into our culture. Then when we look into our own hearts and souls, there can be the voices of questions and doubts, worrying and wondering about how this is all going to end. We can have voices of emotions in our hearts, of missing people, of feeling isolated and cut off. Some of us can have voices of questions and fear because our faith has been shaken in this time. Where has God been in the midst of this pandemic? Why has he allowed it to happen? If you've lost someone close to you or in your neighbourhood or your workplace or in your community, then you might have questions about death itself. Somehow, in the midst of everything in our lives, we have to be able to find a quiet place. A place where we can hear God. That might be a physical space in your home or in your garden, but it might also be a psychological space that you have to carve out in your head and in your heart. It's famously said that Susanna Wesley, who had a dozen children, used to sit at her kitchen table, and when she needed time on her own with God, she would lift her apron and her skirt and put it over her head, and that was an indication to all of her family that she needed to be left alone because she was meditating and thinking about her Saviour. What's the equivalent for you and for me today? How do we find the quiet place? In the words of Psalm 46, how do we be still? The Hebrew word used in Psalm 46 verse 10, be still and know that I am God, is actually a word that is associated with surrender. It could be translated this way: stop trying so hard, lay down your arms, stop striving, be still, and know that I am God. Just because we're in lockdown doesn't mean we've slowed down. Just because we're isolated doesn't mean that we've learned what it is to be alone with God. Just because we are perhaps shielding doesn't mean that we are pressing into God's grace and presence. And tonight, I wonder what you and I need to do to carve out real space to be with God. A quiet space where we can listen. Perhaps that is reading through a gospel. Perhaps it's reading through a psalm. Perhaps it's stilling our hearts. Perhaps it's controlling our breathing. Perhaps it's practicing mindfulness. Perhaps it's using a prayer book. Perhaps it's listening to this each evening in the next couple of nights, just to allow yourself space and time to pause, to stop, and to reflect. We live in a very driven culture, don't we, where we are expected to do so much. And if we're not careful, we just transfer that drivenness into our daily lives with God. We're brought into his presence by grace. We're held in his hands by mercy, but we can so often drive ourselves to somehow prove that God has made the right choice in choosing us, that somehow we're worthy of his love, we deserve it, that in the end we have earned it. But what if there's nothing that we can do to earn God's grace or to earn God's love? Instead, all we have to do is learn how to stop, to find a quiet place, to still our hearts and to listen to what he says. And when we listen to what he says, we find that he speaks love, grace and hope and peace into our hearts. May God do that for you tonight. May he speak peace into your soul and into mine as we rest in his presence. Here's my night blessing that I'd like to share with you for this evening. In life's unpredictability, may God be the steady hand on your tiller. Remember that He understands your uncertainty and stands able to give you stability, peace and direction. He is your peace amid crashing waves, your shelter in storms, and your comfort in chaos. Amen.
The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face to shine on you. The Lord bless you and keep you and give you His peace. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face to shine on you. The Lord bless you and keep you and give you His peace and give you His peace. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord turn His face toward you. The Lord bless you and keep you and be gracious to you. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord turn His face toward you. The Lord bless you and keep you and be gracious to you and be gracious to you. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face to shine on you.